More than 3 full years of fighting and the wasteland of the Western Front remained static, as every day the bodies piled on top of each other and the soldiers remained stuck in the hellish trench system in the West. In Russia, a civil war was dividing a nation, desperate to leave a conflict on foreign lands, only to trade it in for one right in their own backyards. What remained at the end of 1914 remained the same highly contested static warfare going into 1918, but that did not mean that the mindset hadn't changed, and new tactics learned at battles like Somme, Vimy Ridge, Arras, and Ypres hadn't been absorbed by the armies fighting the war. Only 3 years prior, soldiers were charging at machine guns on horseback, equipped with only a saber, getting mowed down in the thousands. Now, generals realized that soldiers need far more decentralized control, because communication could not reach command in time due to telephone wires being destroyed by artillery. Low-ranking officers and soldiers had to change plans in the heat of battle if the plan was ineffective in the moment. Platoons would be reorganized and soldiers would be given special roles as opposed to all being riflemen with the same exact tasks. Now, there were light machine gunners with ammo bearers and 2 grenadiers carrying extra ammo for the machine gunner, extra grenades strapped to their uniform, and a rifle. This type of team would be at the forefront, taking down a machine gun nest and allowing their guys to get by. Snipers also filled a role in the army as they invoked an ever-looming presence during the quieter moments of trench life. Germany had sniper training before the war and had tactics in long-range individual marksmanship, but the Allies did not. It was only until so many soldiers were being picked off by German snipers did the Allies start investing in sniper training to put the same fear of being picked off when you least expected it back into the Germans. The best marksmen were picked to be snipers, which were men who had been familiar with a rifle prior to the war. They would be given a spotter, and many snipers would have to look through their scope for 15 minutes and remember what they saw by describing it to their spotter. Many German snipers got so good at this that they were able to tell apart regular soldiers from officers, because officers had skinnier legs. Sniper posts were also built for marksmen by deliberately covering the best area with the widest field of view. But not only did the weaponry undergo an evolution, but the soldiers' uniforms did as well. In 1914, nobody had a steel helmet from protection against shrapnel, debris, or small caliber bullets. By 1916, every army on the Western Front was equipped with a steel helmet and more plainly colored uniforms. Units in 1918 were not moving all at once, but were now practicing bite and hold tactics, with individual units taking an objective and holding it until backup arrived and they could move onto an enemy trench and supply lines. The infantry would move behind tanks and the creeping barrage to take an objective, with even planes commencing bombing runs on enemy positions during an attack, allowing the ground troops to move through no man's land uninterrupted. But even with this knowledge, the Allies were weary of commencing more offensives. Russia had exited the war. French soldiers were mutinying after the failed Nivelle offensive in 1917, and Britain had poured a lot of effort into Passchendaele and Arras, only for both offensives to yield very little results. The Allies decided to play the long game in 1918 and go on the defensive for a change, until the United States could arrive in full force and then resume offensive strategy for 1919. Germany realized the Americans were coming for them with support from Britain and France. The Germans knew that they had to defeat the Allies before unregulated American capitalism came head-on with their limited army. With the blockade in full effect on German imports, their backs were against the wall. Germany needed a decisive blow fast. Luckily, their victory in the east against the Russians gave them access to over 500,000 free soldiers, which would now be sent to the Western Front to defeat the two allies. The Entente saw the buildup of troops and material up and down the Western Front and knew a major German offensive was coming. The French began to fortify the highly contested region of Chemin des Dames, and the British fortified Flanders. However, the space in between was vulnerable, which is precisely where the Germans would strike first, in the 12-mile sector. Planning for this operation manifested on November 11, 1917, when Erich von Ludendorff went to the Chief of Staffs and laid out the groundwork for the operation, being granted approval instantly. His attack would implement greater emphasis on stormtroopers, since Germany could not produce tanks like the Allies due to their steel imports being blocked by the British Navy. German stormtroopers could not be over 25 years old, had to be mentally tough, physically fit, and single. Squads would have someone carrying a flamethrower, another carrying an MG-08 15 light machine gun, with a few soldiers carrying lots of grenades and pistols with extended magazines. Some soldiers would even be equipped with frontal medieval-style body armor. The Great War was a bridge between the old medieval Victorian era and the new modern era. The young stormtroopers would have the honor of testing out the first submachine gun, the MP-18, developed by Hugo Schmeisser. It could lay down 400 rounds per minute of 9x19 parabellum pistol ammo. Once brought into a trench, the carnage produced from this weapon was chilling and had a major psychological effect on the Allies. On March 21st, 1918, the first phase of attack, called Operation Michael, would commence with 1 million shells pounded on the British and French front lines between Saint-Quentin and Arras, which is where the two Allied armies met. The morning of the attack was blessed and cursed with foggy weather, allowing stormtrooper positions to remain largely obstructed. The British suffered 17,512 casualties on the first day, with 10,000 wounded and 7,512 dead, with both defending British armies on full retreat. However, even though the Germans punched a deep hole in the British lines, the stormtroopers took points that were not strategically significant. The most important points were still highly contested since stormtroopers had to be constantly moving, even though they left a great number of enemy soldiers behind for the regular infantry to get caught up on. It was hard to keep the troops supplied since the stormtroopers had far exceeded their supply lines and were deep in enemy territory, only being lightly equipped so they could move faster since speed was everything to the operation. Once the Germans got past St. Quentin, they had to attack the railway town of Amiens, which was repelled multiple times by the British once the Germans got there. The British and French used many tanks for defense and saw many of them destroyed by German anti-tank weapons, but the Allies would lose 1,300 artillery pieces and over 200 tanks, but they weren't too worried about losing this equipment as they could easily be replaced. German stormtroopers, however, were completely irreplaceable as they were the backbone of this entire offensive. Operation Michael would be called off by Ludendorff on April 5th, 1918. On the 24th of April, the Germans took the town of Villers-Bretonneux. The attack was commanded by Georg von der Marwitz of the 2nd Army. This attack saw the introduction of Germany's first attempt at the tank. 13 brand new German A7V tanks were built, and one nicknamed Nixie met 3 British Mark IV tanks, 2 females and 1 male. Nixie took on the 2 female tanks, which were unable to penetrate the armor of the A7V since they lacked cannons on the female variant. The 2 females retreated with the male model standing against the A7V. The lone British tank opened fire with his 6-pounder gun, moving towards the A7V at the same time, pressing the attack. The A7V would retreat, ending the first and only tank versus tank battle of World War I. Entering the second phase of the offensive was Operation Georgette, or the 4th Battle of Ypres. The Germans had to attack a flat and open sector defended by the Portuguese, who were waiting to be replaced by the British that very same day. Stormtroopers had to cross the Little River and take the Hasbrook railway junction and push for the coast near Dunkirk. 6,000 Portuguese prisoners were taken and a 6-kilometer gap was opened on the British lines. This attack also saw the use of mustard gas, launched by the Livens projector, which had devastating effects on the British and Portuguese in the area. The 1st Portuguese army retreated, leaving the 2nd army to defend themselves. An artillery attack by the Germans would commence on the Portuguese, followed by 8 German divisions attacking the 2nd Army and killing 7,000 men upon the attack. The 55th British Division was south of the 2nd Portuguese Division, and both were protected by the La Basse Canal, which the Germans had to cross if they wished to advance to their objective. But with the combined might of the British, Portuguese, and Anzacs, all managed to hold up against the German attack and stop them from reaching the Hasbrook railway junction. With the Germans low on supplies and not willing to divert any more for other phases of the operation, Ludendorff again gave the order to call off the attack on the 29th of April. 110,000 men would be wounded on all sides during this one phase of attack. By May, the Germans were attacking in the Soissons and Rennes region, which were all held by 4 depleted British divisions. The Germans punched through their defenses quickly, advancing 22 kilometers and crossing the Aisne River in a single day, and reached the Marne River again in June for the first time since September 1914. Paris once again was within sight of the German army. German long-range artillery pieces were shelling the city, and the government were constructing plans to evacuate the citizens of Paris to Bordeaux. The Germans pushed through the river Marne, but then the French countered and managed to push the Germans away from the Marne with 346 tanks. With not enough supplies to continue, having used most of it in prior battles of the spring offensives, and the Allies countering all contested ground that the Germans took throughout the offensive, Ludendorff had no choice but to call off the attack once again. And once again, the Germans were stopped only a few miles short of Paris. Germany had lost most of their stormtroopers and sustained 688,341 casualties from the spring offensive, a staggering loss of life in only 4 months of fighting. The gains by the German army were good by World War I standards, but not good enough to knock France out of the war and enter peace talks in Germany's favor. The Kaiserschlacht would come to an end on July 18, 1918, and the defeat had the Germans on the run and the Allies in hot pursuit.